Chag Sameach. Some of you know what I just said. I'm going to leave it to the rabbi to explain it. Good morning. I actually think this would be better standing up now that you've all sat down. Would you stand up for me? Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. One more time. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Thank you.
What you don't know is that that was actually our closing song.
It just came over me, I'm sorry.
It did. So thank you for coming, and
But then we can do the first song last.
the first shall be last. Yeah, right. Hey. It's an interesting day to meet. You know, it's the first day of Passover. We're in this tension place between Good Friday and Easter. It's really a challenge because for those of us who appreciate that all the world's authentic spiritual traditions are essentially opening to the same one, that each of us presents treasures to the other with which we can deepen our appreciation of our own way, whether our way is institutionalized or not. But instead of living into that, we've lived into a kind of competition which has resulted in incredible brutalities. In the Seder ritual, the Seder is a Hebrew word that means order. And the Passover Seder is the order of the ritual meal. It's a meal built around symbols. And early on in the order, there's a time when, at the beginning, the door of the house was opened, and there was an invitation that went out into the street that said, we're holding the matzah, actually. Has anybody not tasted matzah? It's kind of bread masquerading as cardboard. It's just traditionally it's just wheat and water that's not given any time to rise. So it's mixed very quickly and cooked very quickly at very high temperature, so it comes out in very flat cracker kind of things. And if all it's got is wheat and water, it doesn't. At any rate, it's the bread of simplicity. And traditionally, it was also seen as the bread we ate when we wandered into the wilderness, leaving Egypt, because we didn't have time for the bread to rise, which is an interesting story. Some of us have actually tried to bake matzah in the desert, and I have yet to produce anything at all edible, but it's a nice story. It just reminds us not to take all our stories quite so literally. So at the beginning of the traditional Seder, as it was developing very early on, first century, beginning of the second century, we would open the door and we would hold out a piece of matzah and say, look, this is the bread of affliction, this is the bread of freedom, this is the bread of simplicity. Anybody who's hungry, come and eat. Anybody who wants to join in our Seder, come and join us. And a century or so later, it became a very dangerous act to do, particularly when Passover and Easter coincided. It got to a place where the Jewish community grew especially afraid of kind of appearing in public, appearing their Jewishness in public around the time of Easter because of the blood libel. You know what the blood libel is? It was an interesting story that Jews killed Christian children to use their blood for making matzah, which is really, I mean, if anybody's seen matzah, there's no indication. But you know, well, you know, because we live in an age where stories are starting and, you know, receiving enough hits and enough thumbs up or whatever that we start thinking they're real. And it becomes very challenging to know what's real and what's not. So tradition closed down that early opening the door and inviting people to eat because it was dangerous. And a Christian tradition developed which posed Jesus as being in opposition to the Jewish community, as if Jesus was obviously a Christian. There are times I talk to church communities and I ask people what religion was Jesus? And sometimes there's this strange blank look that comes over people's faces. a long time ago in a meditation. I mean, there's something that always interested me and kind of raised a question for me about the story when Jesus in the Gospels was being killed. He said, Eli, Eli, lama azavtani. It's the first verse of Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? And I always wondered why that? Because as far as I could tell, Jesus set it up. He did exactly what was required. He forecast. He said what he was doing. I mean, if we're to follow the story. And I think he was choosing to do that because he wanted to make a statement about the nature of who we are. You know, the thing that keeps us most from being free, I mean, where it really comes down to it, is the fear of dying. If we were free of the fear of dying, nothing could stop us. And I believe that's what part of what Jesus was attempting to show. I think a presence following his physical death was misinterpreted as a physical presence, as if the teaching was again on the level of the material world and not a teaching about the reality of a spiritual world. As if the teaching was essentially an ego teaching rather than a spiritual teaching about the soul, that deeper life that is expressing through each and every one of us, but is not limited to this particular form in this particular time in this particular place. And in a meditation many years ago, what came up for me was that verse, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I realized my own, I guess, version of an answer, which obviously is true. And what came up for me at that moment was, in that moment, Jesus saw what would be done in his name. A whole ministry devoted to peace, devoted to inclusivity of women, inclusivity of the outcasts. A whole life lived as a traditional Jew. I mean, he wasn't wearing a red robe or a white robe. He was wearing a talit, a prayer shawl. The tradition that grew up around his name de-Judified him, robbed him of the tradition, and as a consequence, created incredible violence against his people. I don't know how many of you read the Christian Bible, but there's a remarkable story in all the Gospels about a tradition that actually seems to have been invented by the New Testament authors, because it is recorded nowhere else, and that is on Passover, 2 prisoners would be offered to the Jewish community occupied by Rome, and the population would be able to vote which one was freed. and of course, which one would be killed. And so we have the story of somebody named Barabbas. The story is told of Barabbas and Jesus being brought to the crowd, and everybody, which one do you want to save? And everybody said, save Barabbas, kill Jesus. The problem is, A, that custom never happened, but B, Barabbas is Aramaic for son of the father. Bar Abba. Bar Abba was not another guy. So if you look into tradition, Yeshua Bar Abba was the name. Yeshua is what Jesus was called in his time. Jesus never heard the word Jesus. Because J, the J sound does not appear in Hebrew or Aramaic. So if any of you, incidentally, are around for the second coming, please don't call him Jesus, because he won't know who you're talking to. I mean, obviously, I come from a tradition that has borne a lot of wounds from the kind of polarization that got set up. But I'm not alone in that. Jewish tradition is not alone in that. We do that to each other. Whether it's Muslims and Buddhists, whether it's Buddhists and Hindus, whether it's Christians and Muslims, whether it's Christians and Jews. Which raises the real question. How do we get out of this trap? How do we wake up to the essential nature of the wisdom shared by all the world's great spiritual teachers? How do we get out of this competitive notion where we want to find out which one is best? So here we are. Tradition has it that we left Egypt at midnight on the 15th of the Hebrew month of Nisan, which is today. You know, the Jewish day starts at sunset and ends at sunset, so we're still in, last night started. You know why we left on the 15th of Nisan, on the 15th of the month? Because of the full moon. The Hebrew month begins on the new moon, ends on the waning moon, and the middle of every Hebrew month is a full moon. Apparently, in those days, we didn't trust our flashlights. And people didn't know if they had enough charge in their iPhones to light the way, so we had to trust the moon. But it just seems to me perfect that we get to meet on this Saturday. Because in some senses, we get to look at, if we are beginning on a journey, what's the journey about? And if we're heading for a resurrection, what is it that needs to be born? And if we're entering into a journey, is it an outer journey or an inner journey? And if we're waiting for something to be born, is it an inner birth or an outer birth? Many of us believe that the fate of humanity rests on our choice. Because living in this sea of competitive realities, we are succeeding along a path of destroying ourselves. We can't do it by agreeing on who's right and who's wrong. We can only do it by listening to each other's narratives, no matter how irreconcilable they appear, and no longer trying to prove anyone else's narrative wrong. No longer trying to prove anybody else's belief wrong. Can't be done. But insisting that within ourselves and within each other we look beyond, behind, beneath, above the belief. Behind, beneath, above the narrative. It's like each of us walks with our own narrative. It's our own story. My story is called Ted. Your story is labeled with your name. But unless I understand that I am more than this story, I'm trapped. Unless you understand that you are more than that story, you're trapped. And if the journey out of enslavement means anything, it means moving from the enslavement of this limited identity that pits us one against the other, that has us comparing ourselves without mercy, into an inclusive identity that allows us to live into the absolute interconnectedness of all being. And the only way I know to start such a journey is not with condemnation, not with simply pointing out what we've done wrong and how we've messed up, but by stepping into the blessing of the moment, by stepping into the blessing of each and every one of us, by stepping into a space of saying, yes, everything is as it is, whether I want it to be or not. And it's my not wanting it to be that keeps it stuck. So how do I do what the ego tells me will keep me stuck? Because the ego will say, if I totally accept this moment, I'll never grow. Oh, poor ego. I mean, just look into your own lives. I look into my life and I take that as a guide. Has that been true? Has it really been true? That when I resist something, I fix it? When I resist something, I grow beyond it? It doesn't seem to be like that. When I resist something and try to change on the basis of that resistance, I wind up, lo and behold, in the same place I was. But when I'm willing, when I risk accepting myself, accepting others, accepting reality exactly as it is, I make room for evolution. I give up the fight that keeps the whole process stuck. It's like breathing. What the ego would like to do is only breathe in. So we begin on this day not only with honoring energies of Passover and not only honoring energies of rebirth, but honoring energies of Shabbat. And the metaphor of Shabbat in the traditional myth of creation is really clear. On Shabbat, everything is simply celebrated as it is. When it says you don't work, I mean, of course, when we institutionalize things, we then institutionalize exactly the kinds of work we don't do. But that's not. The work is getting out of the consciousness of trying to change anything. We've been changing everything. We've been creating everything this whole week. Shabbat is a moment of going, yes. It's a celebration of creation. God bless you. Was that you? How do you do that? You just... I didn't want to embarrass Don. I thought I'd embarrass Richard instead. Coincidentally, the words that are on the screen are words of celebration of a Shabbat. Ma yafeh hayom. Ma means what? Yafeh is beautiful. Hayom, the day. Shabbat shalom, Sabbath wholeness, Sabbath peace, Sabbath yesness. And so I invite you with the singing to imagine a space of yesness in your consciousness. So we have this ancient story of getting out of Egypt. And we have this modern story, a continually present story of getting out of Egypt. The Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim. And what the mystical tradition in Judaism did a long time ago was divide that into two words. Mitzrayim meaning geographical location, dividing into mi, tsarim. Mi means from. Tsarim is from tight places, from narrow places. And that makes it a journey of today. You know, because we're not talking about geography. We're talking about a journey of our soul. The Seder ritual is celebrated with a host of symbols. And the original idea was to create a meal that would invite questions. You know, people would come to the table, and instead of a nice challah, and instead of a nice braided, rich bread, they would find stacks of square cardboard. I'm really being unfair. I happen to really like matzah. I remember bringing matzah sandwiches to school. It did invite some peculiar looks, and you had to be careful what you put on it. Peanut butter was particularly good, you know, in terms of how it would crumble. During the 8 days of Passover, it says, don't eat leaven. Don't eat things that are puffed up. Why? Because puffed upness is a reflection of our ego. Our ego is what gets puffed up. We get puffed up. And it becomes a problem place. Or it becomes a vehicle that carries problems. It becomes a vehicle that defines itself with problems, with needs, with comparisons. My own favorite is, have I done enough? And whenever I ask that question, the answer is pretty clear. Because if I feel I've done enough, that question doesn't come up. I don't know what your question is, you know, your favorite question of your ego, but you got one. So the tradition is that we eat unleavened bread, and we don't eat leavening for a week, and matzah is considered as a medicine to help us deflate the puffed upness with which we walk the world. Now, of course, food alone won't do it. You know, but it's like, okay, how do we call ourselves to this remembering? And then we go, how come we don't do it all the time? Like if we want to avoid the puffed upness, how come we don't eat matzah all the time and don't eat anything leavened? You know why? Well, one reason is the population would not support that. But the other reason is there is a function to our puffed upness. Because it's our puffed upness that gives us the conflicts and the pointers guiding us in our own path of evolution. It's like the conflicts in our lives are not incidental or accidental to our lives. They are allowing us to perceive what we need to utilize as guides for our own evolution. These are not mistakes. These are our own guidelines. So too, we need to discover. So we discover, where will my puffed upness go this year? Because it's gonna. We spend most of our time managing our individual vehicles in the material world. And we dedicate and rededicate ourselves to managing them as lovingly, as compassionately, as kindly as we possibly can, and then, if you're anything like me, discovering moments of unconsciousness, of forgetting, moments of reactivity, where everything else suddenly falls away and we are justifying and defending our action. The Shabbat before Passover is called Shabbat HaGadol. There are about 4 Shabbats during the year that have special names. Shabbat HaGadol means the big Shabbat. And years ago, I was talking about the big Shabbat, and somebody asked, what about the little Shabbat? And I loved that question, because the answer I heard was, the little Shabbat are those moments during any day where that kind of Shabbat consciousness just sparks. And you find yourself going, wow, yes. You know, just like an eruption out of the self-criticism, an eruption out of the criticism of others, an eruption out of the criticism of the world, and just going, oh, there's so much beauty. There's so much good. In the Seder ritual, we take a sprig of greens. Traditionally, it's parsley or celery, and we dip it in salt water. And people are supposed to say, well, what do you do that for?
What do you do that for?
Well, I didn't mean people here were supposed to say that.
Too late now.
But big figure, originally, this was, we're doing things, and people at the table are going, what are you doing that for? What do you do the matzah for? Well, we get to tell stories. We take a symbol of spring, because here is spring. And so we take new growth and we dip it into salt water because it's a symbol of our tears, but it's also a symbol that we are beings of salt water. You know, most of our physical reality is water, but it's not just any water. We are saltwater beings.
It's not just any water.
Donald just said we are all bottled at source. And it's a mixture, you know. But every year, things, you know, in the fall and winter, we watch things die. And then in the spring, which usually comes much earlier in Seattle than I ever knew it in the rest of my life, for the, I don't know, maybe the first 5 years we lived here, I kept thinking the plants and the flowers were coming up too soon. You know, because it's still going to get cold. And it took me a long time to finally get that they actually knew more than I did about when they were supposed to emerge. But you know the sense, you know, when you watch, that just flowered, or all the green buds. And it's just, that's the parsley or celery. Most of us don't use celery. You know why? Because if you're sitting around with a table full of people and everybody's taking celery and dipping it and eating it, it makes a real lot of noise. It's also why in churches the bread at communion is not the matzah that Jesus was obviously holding up at the Last Supper, because he did not eat leavening during Passover, but it would make too much noise if you do that. So most Christian traditions use bread regular bread instead, even though their founder wouldn't do that. Anyway, then we do a symbol of we eat the matzah. Then we do a symbol of bitter herb. The bitter herb that is usually used now is horseradish root. I love to prepare the horseradish root. For many years, I made horseradish. What do you call it when it's prepared? Horseradish and vinegar, apple cider vinegar, and the secret ingredient to make it taste even sharper. You know what it is? Sugar. If you add a little bit of sugar, if you happen to buy like the regular horseradish that's prepared horseradish, add a little sugar to it. It brings out the sharpness. I actually stopped making my own prepared horseradish, because it got painful. Like horseradish really emits, and I'd be sitting there with my eyes pouring down, and okay, that was enough. I think I've had enough of that. So at our Seders, I make slices, and we eat the slice. And the interesting thing about the slice is that the longer you chew it, the sharper the taste. So if you want to avoid that sharpness, you just chew it real fast and swallow it. If you want to really start sensing into it. So why do we eat bitter herb? So the tradition says we eat bitter herb to remind us consciously of the pain of enslavement. The tradition says that we were so used to our enslavement that we didn't even know how much it hurt. The story is fascinating because it says nothing happened until we cried out our pain. It's like we woke up to, it hurts. And that's the beginning. That's the beginning of the journey. We've begun already just waking up to the nature of our condition. So eat the bitter herb to help us wake up. What is happening in our lives that we are feeling pain about, but we're not even aware of it? We want to increase our awareness. Not in some kind of self-flagellation, but in some kind of self-awakening. And then we have a symbol called charoset, which is a mixture of apples and nuts and grape juice or wine. In the Sephardic tradition, which is the Middle Eastern countries, it has dates and raisins in it, so it's a different kind of mixture. And the tradition has it that that's reminiscent of the mortar we used when we were enslaved and building storehouses. A lot of people thought, I guess when I was growing up, that what we were building were pyramids. But the Egyptians would not have a slave people building pyramids. Pyramids were sacred places. We were building storehouses. The secret about charoset is that actually nobody knows what it actually was about. So we tell a story, we fit it into the story. But it's some kind of sweet mixture that keeps things together. And there's a tradition that you take the bitter herb and you dip it into the sweet mixture of charoset and you eat them together. Because in this realm, there is no bitterness that also doesn't have some hidden sweetness. And there is no sweetness that doesn't also have some hidden bitterness. We just walk around with a mind that knows only through contrast. Before eating the meal, it's customary to eat an egg. And that clearly is very much in accord with Christian tradition. It's one of the eggs that the rabbit has laid. In Jewish tradition, when you come back to a house of mourning from a funeral or from a burial, one of the first things you eat is an egg, traditionally. Egg is a symbol of eternality. Egg is a symbol of, some kind of rebirth. We change it into, we color the eggs, we hide the eggs, we find, on Easter. We argue about whether it's safe to eat eggs or not. But traditionally, egg has been a symbol. Maybe there's other symbols that you might find, that would remind us of that kind of rebirth and that kind of eternality. But no matter what the foods are, no matter what the questions and the answers are, ultimately, it's about a renewal. It's about entering into a space and allowing, inviting, God bless you. Is that you again? Celebrating renewal.
Here we are in the springtime of the year, celebrating new life and the path that brought us here. The winter of our journeys come and gone. We're calling in a new light and welcoming the dawn. There's a sense of new hope all around. Maybe peace, maybe somewhere in some war-torn town, where the birds return to the trees and smoke no longer lingers in a brand new breeze. Well, let's celebrate and renew. I'll be your loving best friend while we review. Maybe that is all we'll need to do. Let's celebrate and renew. Well, maybe it's the cycle of the moon, just stirring up the tides on a stormy afternoon, where our beaches stay so strong. We can take in that view as night comes on. Then we'll walk down by the beach and renew. Maybe catch an early star or the rising moon. And I think that is all we'll need to do. walk so closely to each other, make one heart out of two. Let's walk by the beach and renew. Renew, it'll just be me and you. Renew, and this day will do. This moment is a present, it'll only take a few. Let's walk hand in hand and renew. Now this here is the time of our lives, well, we can thrive or simply survive, oh, but never throw it all away instead. Now let's hang on to each other, oh my friends, well, let's hang on tight and renew. From our souls in this perfect little room, I think that is all we'll need to do. Just hang on to each other, make one heart out of two. Let's hang on tight and renew. You can hang on to me, I'll hang on to you. Let's hang on tight and renew.
You know, we have one Stephen and one Steve with us. Actually, last month and this month, it's been great. Stephen Merritt at the piano and Steve Mason on the guitar.
We're having a good time too.
I'm glad. It shows. This is a song that's probably sung at many Seders. And many in the Jewish community think of it as a Jewish song. I mean, it is, but it's also not. This is actually African American spiritual. And it just adds another dimension to the story, because a real story, a real inclusive story, is always universal. The more universal a story, the more inclusive a story, the more spiritual the story. Because that's a story that helps us awaken. Awaken to the more. So many of us remember the civil rights movement in the 1960s, where we fixed the problem of racism. Many of us remember actually the protests during the Vietnam era, where we fixed the problem of war. Once again, we tried to fix things on the outside without fixing them on the inside. We tried to change things on the outside that would, result in a kind of peace that we didn't cherish and focus on the inside. To really leave our stuckness is actually not an easy thing. I relate it to New Year's resolutions, where the question that always comes up for me when I write resolutions or when anyone else does, is there anything in your current resolution, your current list of resolutions, that's anything like any of the other resolutions you've written in other years? Yeah. And if so, what exactly does that indicate? Perhaps it indicates that we keep trying to change things from the level of the problem. We keep thinking at the level of the problem we know the answer. But that's highly unlikely. And we keep proving it by following what we think is the answer and then discover that we've wound up at the same place. We've got the same resolution next year. What's my Egypt? What's the limitation? Where's my stuckness? Boy, isn't that something I thought last year? And the year before that, and the year before that. We keep thinking that where we're going, where we need to go, is somewhere out there, rather than somewhere in here. We keep thinking that where we need to get to is somewhere we need to find, rather than somewhere we need to remember. The remarkable thing about the story of our enslavement, as told as the switch between the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus, is that it says, a Pharaoh arose who knew not Joseph. Do you know that when we came into Egypt, Egypt was a promised land? We were in a severe drought, and because Joseph had become a second in command in Egypt, he was able to bring the whole family into the land of Goshen, a particularly fertile area. We came there as a promised land. It got us out of drought, it got us out of scarcity, it got us out of the fear of not having enough water, of not having enough food. It was wonderful. And then it says, a Pharaoh arose who knew not Joseph. A Pharaoh arose who forgot, but I'm convinced we forgot. And I think ultimately it's our forgetting that leads us into enslavement every time. And I think we have this notion that when we get to the promised land, when we get to a place that really this is right, well, then it's it. And all we have to do is enjoy it. But there is an imperative embedded in the consciousness we share, and that imperative is evolutionary. There is no end place. There are unlimited levels of transcendence, and we are invited to open and to open and to open and to open. And the way we are invited to open is to notice where we're closed. Every promised land will become our next place of stuckness. But that also means that every place of stuckness becomes a doorway into our next promised land. It reminds us that the problems in the outer world are never going to be fixed forever. It reminds us that there is a kind of vigilance, there's a kind of awareness required, a sensitivity, so that we might taste the bitterness, whether we are experiencing it ourselves or whether we are witnessing it in others, and know that that bitterness needs to be attended to. And so it's not a negative to find out where are our stuck places this year. It's an invitation. We always seek a Moses to fix things for us. But the Moses we need to fix things is within each and every one of us. And the Pharaoh that we need to meet is also within each and every one of us. So here's the dance. What a great opportunity.
When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. Thus spoke the one, old Moses said, let my people go. If not, I'll smite your firstborn dead. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. No more shall they in bondage toil. Let my people go. They shall go forth with Egypt's spoil. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go.
Many of us are bothered by that killing the firstborn thing. On the one hand, it's a balance, because the Pharaoh had ordered that the firstborn sons of the Israelite people be killed. So that's at the beginning of the story. So at the end of the story, there's a balance. You kill our kids, we'll kill your kids.
Right.
But the question is, what actually is a firstborn son? What actually is a firstborn daughter? What is a firstborn child? Firstborn child is an idea. I mean, in the physical sense, that kind of, we project that idea out onto a physical being. Sometimes with positive consequences and sometimes not so positive, because we have an idea of who that person either is or should be, or we want to be. We want to be. But on the idea level, our firstborn is an idea that has lost its functionality. Firstborn ideas are always ego ideas. They're always self-serving ideas. They're always comparison ideas. And in one way or another, we got to encounter them, and we have to meet them, and we have to be willing to let them go. I'm unable to, I don't believe in the a God who acts out there and like some big father or some big mother. I don't believe in a God who kills children, much less a God who kills people. I think the reason people die is that people get born. If we didn't get born, we wouldn't die. It's a consequence. You know, life and death are not opposites. Birth and death are opposites. And so I understand that the other side of every birth is a death to what had been before, and the other side of every death is a birth to that which follows. I think life is that unending stream that flows through many births and many deaths and many births and many deaths. And our task and our challenge is to awaken more clearly to that life, because it's always here and it's always us. And to the degree to which we are able to awaken to that stream is the degree to which we participate in an evolution of consciousness, an evolution of ourselves, an evolution of all life. The story of the Exodus is a formational story. That is to say, it changed the nature of our being. And it feels to me like it was formational on three levels. The first was the awakening of a way. And the way was spelled out with what Moses heard. The way is called I am as I am. It's a way of one. It's why the very first of the what get called the Ten Commandments, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am is the eternal one, your God. Asher hotzeti me'eretz Mitzrayim, the one who took you out of the land of Egypt. The Exodus is right there in the very first. This is formational. The way is born in the Exodus, in that story. The second thing that's born is a people, because it's the story of our people. And the third thing that's born is purpose. And the purpose is to allow our peopleness to walk the way into the world. To allow our peopleness to walk the way of one into our world. So it's still a story unfolding. And that story is unfolding within each and every one of us. So I invite you, if you feel comfortable, to allow your eyes to close. And as in any entering into meditation, simply become aware of how it is right now, without needing it to be any other than it is. How is it right now to be in your body? How is it to be in your mind? Whether there are judgments, negative, positive, whatever. Just noticing. Just allowing your mind to do whatever it's doing. And noticing the feelings. You might notice in any given moment, where is there more energy? Is there more energy in physical sensations? Is there more energy in thought? Is there more energy in feelings? Just noticing. And noticing the breath. The breath that sustains us so naturally, most of the time we're even unaware that we're breathing. And just notice how the breathing is right now. Alive to our senses, how it feels to be sitting, how the floor feels beneath your feet, how the air feels against your face. And aware of the one who has those sensations, who knows those sensations, but is more than any particular sensation. Aware of the thoughts. Aware of the way the mind automatically makes judgments. How the mind appreciates and criticizes, enjoys and dislikes. And the feelings. And aware of the one receiving, hearing the thoughts, entertaining the feelings, knowing the sensations. Perhaps appreciating how compelling it is to identify solely with our thoughts, to identify solely with our sensations, and to identify solely with our feelings and forget to remember the one listening, the one receiving, the one knowing. Perhaps aware that the journey to which we are called, at a moment of opening beyond our personal enslavements, at a moment of rebirth, at a moment of evolution, that evolution, that rebirth, that occurs behind the sensations, behind the mind, behind the feelings. And so in whatever way is right for you, imagine opening the heart to the greater love that seeks you. Imagine opening the mind to the greater wisdom, yearning to have you remember. Perhaps imagining a resounding yesness, a release of resistance, an opening to an evolutionary expansion of greater love, of greater wisdom, of greater kindness, an awakening of greater compassion. Imagining somewhere deep inside the times are a-changin.
Come gather round people wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept it that soon you'll be drenched like a bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times, they are a-changin'. Come senators, congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in the doorway, don't block up the hall, for he that gets hurt will be he who has stalled. There's a battle outside and it's raging, and it'll soon shake your windows and rattle your walls, but the times, they are a-changin'. The line it is drawn, the curse it is cast, and the slow one now will later be fast, as the present now will later be past. The order is rapidly fading, and the first one now will later be last, for the times, they are a-changin'. For the times, they are a-changin'. Sing it with me. For the times, they are a-changin'.
There's one more Passover song. And in some ways, it's the quintessential Passover song. The song is called Dayenu. The Dayenu is a Hebrew word that means it's enough. I think it's the quintessential Passover song because the Seder tends to go on so long that the people are ready to sing it's enough already. I think it's the quintessential Passover song because we are facing levels of enslavement within ourselves, the ways we have kept ourselves closed, the ways we have inhibited the deeper wisdom, the fuller love, and we've done it enough. And it also brings a kind of energy to the moment, which is very different than the energy of most of the other songs and the blessings which are recited at a Seder on a night of Passover. So the first three verses are traditional. It would have been enough if you just had taken us out of Egypt. That would have been enough. It would have been enough if you just gave us the Shabbat. That would have been enough. It would have been enough if you just gave us the Torah. That would have been enough. And then the lines added actually this year. If we only loved each other, it would be enough. If we only fed the hungry, it would be enough. If we only welcomed strangers, it would be enough. If we only loved ourselves, it would be enough. For those of you who don't know the first verses, you'll have plenty of time to sing the Dayenu.
And do you want to try and put the last three?
The last four, actually, we're not going to do Dayenu after each one, or we'll be here for an additional half hour. We're going to do each of those verse parts one after the other, after the other, after the other, and we'll just do one Dayenu at the end.
But we can only do three of them. Can't do four.
Is that true?
Yeah, it's true.
We can only do three of them. We can't do four. So everybody could pick whichever three. So I would do the last three. Okay? Which is not to diminish the first one, but let's just start with action. The secret, of course, is the last one. God, if we could only love ourselves. Lu hotzi hotzi anu hotzi
anu mi Mitzrayim, hotzi anu mi Mitzrayim, Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. Natan lanu et ha-Torah, Natan lanu et ha-Torah, Dayenu, 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 Dayenu,
If we only fed the hungry, if we only fed the hungry, if we only fed the hungry, Dayenu. If we only welcome strangers, if we only welcome strangers, if we only welcome strangers, Dayenu. If we only loved ourselves, if we only loved ourselves, if we only loved ourselves, Dayenu. 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 Dayenu.
And please rise as you are able. One of the greatest early 11th century commentators on the entire Bible and the entire Talmud was named Rashi, French scholar. And in his commentary on the Exodus story the Exodus story in the book of Exodus, he asked the question, what percentage of the enslaved people left Egypt? And his answer was 10%, which was fascinating. You know, because you think, well, any people who are really enslaved, everybody is just ready to go. Give me a chance to get out of here and I'm with you. But actually, it's not like that. It's a deep choice. So I invite you this year to open to possibility. To ask yourself questions like, what would I do if I knew I couldn't fail? To ask yourself questions like, what inhibits my awakening? My awakening to the greater inclusivity of my own being. Where are the walls of my ego? That I accidentally, on purpose, constructed. What have I forgotten? And what am I in need of remembering? And how can I find others who are willing to engage that journey with me? I believe we human beings need community. And I believe that what we get to share in this place on this spiritual Saturday is an intentional spiritual community. We ourselves are not a church. We ourselves are not a synagogue. We're just ourselves. But I believe that each and every one of us is here on purpose. I believe that each and every one of us allows this to be. I also appreciate the support that each and every one of us has either offered on the way in or on the way out. But the truth is, what I'm most grateful for is the support of your presence. Do I have another announcement? Thank you. The bookstore is open especially for us. You can have any book you want. They have a section, what is the section? They have my books. Do they have the Omer book? The 49 days that start tonight lead from leaving a stuck place to standing at Sinai. In other words, a journey of awakening. And some years ago, a second edition of A Journey of Awakening was published. We actually have very few physical copies left. So I think there's some in the bookstore. And the bookstore has stayed open for us. So maybe at least poke your head in and say hi. I'm glad to be with you on this journey. And the critical commitment is always the same. To find clearer, more loving, more compassionate ways of supporting each other as we journey from strength to strength, from love to love, and from life to life. And now the first song of the program.
ba bim bam,
Ya ba ba bim bam, ya ba bim bam,
ya ba ba ya ba 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 ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba bim bam, ya ba ba ya ba 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 bam. That repeats. Ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba bim bam, ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba ya ba 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 ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba bim bam, ya ba ba ya ba 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 bam. Ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba bim bam, ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba ya ba 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 ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba bim bam, ya ba ba ya ba 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 bam. Ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba bim bam, ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba ya ba 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 ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba bim bam, ya ba ba ya ba 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 ba. Go to the middle part. Ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba bim bam, ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba ya ba 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 ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba bim bam, ya ba ba ya ba 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 bam. Ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba bim bam, ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba ya ba 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 ya ba bim bam, ya ba ba bim bam, ya ba ba ya ba 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 bam. It's a good way to start, right?